I just put some new pads on these. They had these velour type pads on them, but I replaced them with this sheepskin leather, and they seem really nice. I think I'm going to dig that. These are the Beyer DT770s. And so let's talk about headphones. And I thought I would share with you the headphones that I have in my collection that have worked well for me. Now, none of my headphones are really esoteric, high-end headphones that will impress the audiophiles. All of my headphones are pretty typical, middle-of-the-road, professional-grade headphones that have worked well. I think they sound good, and I think they're comfortable, and they're not tremendously expensive. And so I thought I would share with you the headphones that I use and maybe give you some food for thought if you're looking for a decent pair of headphones. Headphones are great value because for not a huge amount of money, you can get into some pretty good sounding headphones that will rival speakers that cost much more. And so I'll start off by talking about the Beyer DT770s. These are a closed type headphone so that they seal out all the outside noises. And they also seal in what you're listening to so other people don't hear too much of it. This is a round-the-ear style headphone, so your ear goes inside of the ear cup here. And they block off sounds pretty well. And I thought that with these new ear pads that are leathered, they'd block even more sounds. And that's one of the main reasons why I like these phones, because they sound good and they really isolate you. So if you're in a noisy environment and you want to block out some of that stuff so you can focus on what you're listening to, these work great. The Beyer DT770s have good bass, but not over the top, but definitely solid amount of bass. And they have pretty smooth response overall, but they're not quite as detailed and articulate as some of the other phones in my collection. But they're definitely a good choice. They're also pretty rugged. All of the parts are available for these if you need to maintain them, such as ear pads and top cushions and so forth. And so I think they're a good contender, and I think these sell for about $150. I do think, in my opinion, the DT770s are actually better than some of the higher-end Beyers, such as the DT880s and 990s. Now, all of these are very different kinds of headphones. The 880s and 990s might have a little clearer high-end, but for overall balance, I'd go for the 770s. That's my choice. Next, I have the Sony MDR7506. These are a really common headphone that you'll find at TV and radio stations and some studios. They're pretty rugged. They're foldable, so you can fold them up like that. That's kind of cool. They are semi-closed design, so they block out a fair amount of the outside noise, but not as much as those Beyers do. Like the Beyers, I've replaced the pads on these, but you have to replace pads every once in a while. These are not the most accurate headphones. They got a little bit of a hyped response. They also have really good bass. I think they have a bit more high-end clarity, and they're some of my most favorite fun phones to listen to. If I'm casually listening to music, I often reach for these because I think they're just enjoyable to listen to, even though they might not have the most perfect flattest response. Having said that, it seems like when I mix music, my mixes usually turn out best when wearing these phones, and maybe that's just simply because I'm really familiar with the way that they sound and what things should sound like. So these are a little less expensive than the Beyers, and I think they're a terrific choice. The Sony 7506s. Been around for a long time. It's an industry staple. So that's them. These are the AKG K240s. The K240's also been around forever. And these are relatively open phones. So when you put them on, you can hear the outside activities, and they don't really isolate you a whole lot. You can also hear what's going on in the headphones when you're outside of them a little bit as well. They are very popular in recording studios and radio stations and such. There's been a number of different variations in the AKG K240s over the years. I think they're all good phones, from the oldest ones to the newest ones, which are made in China. They all share basically some of that K240 DNA. But there's been a number of changes over the years and a number of different versions of them. This particular version that I have here is the K240 monitors, which is not a real popular version around. They're, of course, long discontinued, but they're the gold-colored ones. And the monitors are considered one of the more desirable variants that has particularly good sound. The other one that I have, these black ones, these are K240 DFs, and the DFs were made to have particularly flat and accurate frequency response for mixing. Both of these K240s are fairly desirable versions, and they both sound really good. They've both got a lot of high-end clarity and spatial delivery, so you really feel immersed in the music. Both of these also have a little bit laid-back bass response. So if you like really bumping bass in your music, a K240 might not be your choice. Although I do think they have good bass and they're balanced. They're not going to rattle your noggin with bass. These were made in Austria. The modern ones are made in China. I think they're all good phones. I'm a little bit partial to the ones that were made in Austria, and I'm a little bit partial to the monitor, the DF, or the sextants. Those seem to be the most desirable variants. But all of the K240s are good phones, and they can be had for a pretty good price as well. Okay, so once you've chosen a headphone that you're interested in, there's another choice in many cases, and that is, do you want these headphones in a high impedance version or a low impedance version? Now, there are some headphones that are only offered in one variety, but many have choices, and all of my headphones are high impedance 600 ohm phones, except for the Sonys. And when I'm talking a high impedance headphone, I'm talking values of 200, 300, 600 ohms. Low impedance phones tend to be in the 20 to 50 ohm range, some as low as 8 ohms. Now, to understand this, I think we need to talk electronics a little bit. My headphones at 600 ohms I chose for a couple of reasons. One is that I can use them as a diagnostic tool with pro audio equipment. In pro audio line level connections that are balanced using XLR connectors, those pieces of equipment are generally designed to drive a 600 ohm load. So if I have 600 ohm headphones, I can just use some alligator clips and clip right onto that lead and see if there's a signal on the wire. If I was to use low impedance headphones, that would put too much load on the equipment. But with 600 ohm phones, I can just tap right in there and use that as a diagnostic tool to see if there's something going on that wire. That's not how I'd normally just sit and listen to music, of course, but just as a test tool, you can do that. The other thing is that 600 ohm headphones generally, typically, sound best, or they sound better than their low impedance counterparts. And to understand this, we need to understand the concept of voltage, current, and impedance, and watts. If you were to pop open the hood of a typical automobile and look in the engine compartment, you'd see a battery. Coming off that battery is a couple of really heavy-duty thick wires, thicker than my thumb. And you need such heavy-duty thick wires in order to deliver the power and the current necessary to turn the electric starter motor over and get that engine started when it's cold. Cold starting a big car engine can take over 1,000 watts of power. And so that's why we need such big battery cables to carry all that power. But then if we were to look inside of your kitchen, chances are you have a microwave oven or maybe a toaster. And both of those appliances also use about 1,000 watts of power. But you'll notice that their power cables aren't nearly as thick as your car battery cables. And that's because the appliances in your home are running at 120 volts. Or if you're in Europe, maybe higher than that. And at higher voltage, we need less current to deliver the same amount of power. Power is the combination of the voltage and the current. And so in an automobile at 12 volts, we need a whole bunch of current in order to generate 1,000 watts. But in the home situation, we need 1/10 the amount of current when we're up at 120 volts or higher to deliver 1,000 watts. And it's the current that determines how thick the wire needs to be. And so if we have low impedance headphones, they're going to work at fairly low voltage and high current. If we have high impedance headphones, they don't present much load to your amplifier, and they expect higher levels of voltage with correspondingly lower levels of current to drive those headphones. So with high impedance headphones, we're not drawing a lot of current out of the equipment to drive them, and that makes them easy to drive as far as the amplifier is concerned. But they do demand higher levels of voltage, and they don't require as thick of wire internally to generate the same amount of power. And so since we can use thinner wire, they have thinner wire on their elements that makes their elements more lightweight. And since they're more lightweight, they can respond to transients better, and they can produce high-frequency sounds more clearly. And so that's why I go for high-impedance headphones. Now, the problem with high-impedance headphones is that they require more voltage to drive. And they can require more than 10 or 12 volts to really get up to their full power capabilities. And a lot of consumer electronics, a lot of electronic devices, can only deliver a few volts of output to the headphone jack. Maybe 10 volts of output to the headphone jack on some equipment. If it's equipment that runs on batteries, perhaps even less. And so that means that a lot of equipment just doesn't have the ability to swing enough voltage to make high impedance headphones work their best. So you might be finding yourself turning them up and wishing you could turn them up more, but you're limited in the amount of output with the equipment that you have. Now, of course, there are a lot of purpose-made headphone amplifiers that are designed to swing high amounts of voltage to drive high-impedance phones. And that's why a lot of people will choose a dedicated headphone amplifier, especially if they're using high-impedance headphones. Now, with low-impedance headphones, they're much easier for a lot of equipment to drive, because just a few volts into a low-impedance headphone, like a 50-ohm headphone or less, will usually drive them up to nice, comfortably loud levels. So for most consumers, especially people using battery-powered equipment, which is limited by the amount of voltage that it can swing, low-impedance phones are the best choice. But if you want the very top sound quality and are willing to deal with the issues of finding a headphone amplifier that can drive these headphones properly, high-impedance headphones are the best choice. So I hope that was informative and useful to you. If you like this kind of content, I'd appreciate if you take a quick moment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your actions of subscribing, hitting that bell for notifications of new videos, participating in the comments, or giving the video a thumbs up. All these things tell YouTube that people are appreciating the channel and they should promote it to more folks. And I appreciate your support. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on another upcoming episode.